The print came up in the developer tray a little after 2 in the morning. The way they do. Gray ghosts first, then the blacks walking in, and it was a frame of the second-floor corridor, with the flooring stripped out. Just joists, and hanging lath, and one work lamp burning far down at the end. And I was rocking the tray with my fingertips, 19 years old, alone in a government darkroom that smelled of fixer and dust when the figure resolved. In the doorway of what had been the Lincoln suite, half in shadow, stood a workman, head level, arms down, facing the camera, the way nobody in a work photograph ever faces the camera. And I stood there, with the red safe light humming, and the print swimming under my fingers, and I felt my whole skin go cold, and stay cold, because I had logged that job myself. I had the order slip on the spindle, not 3 feet away, and I knew 2 things, the way you know your own name. The first was that the photograph had been taken at night after the shift, in an empty building with 2 guards on the doors, and no one signed inside. And the second was worse, and it took me a moment to let myself see it. There was no floor in that doorway. The boards were gone. The joists were gone. Behind that doorway was a drop of 40 feet into the dark of the old kitchens, and the figure stood in the middle of the empty doorframe, level and easy, standing on the place where a floor used to be. Stay with me tonight, because every photograph I am going to describe to you is real, and you can look at almost all of them yourself, and I will tell you where. But first, do one small thing for me. Put in the comments where you are watching from, the city, the state, the time on your clock. I am an old man who spent his working life in dark rooms, printing other men's pictures, and I have learned that the dark is easier company when you know who else is sitting in it. My name does not matter, and the reason it does not matter is part of the story. So let me begin instead with the house. And with the year, the United States government gutted the most famous building in the world, down to a stone shell, and photographed every week of it. And I want you to understand from the start that this is not legend. This is not rumor. This is the most documented demolition in American history. Between 1948 and 1952, the White House, the actual White House, was emptied of every floor, every wall, every staircase, every room you have ever seen in a picture, until nothing remained but the outer stone walls of 1792 standing around a hole in the ground. And the reason was simple and terrifying. The building was falling down. It had been patched and loaded and rewired and plumbed for a century and a half. And by the late 40s, it was, in the words of the engineers, standing up purely from habit. A leg of Margaret Truman's piano broke through the sitting room floor. The great chandelier in the blue room swayed when the honor guard walked upstairs. President Truman himself wrote to his sister that the ceiling of his study had dropped and that he was sleeping in a house held up by hope. The commission looked at it and condemned very nearly all of it, and in December of 1949, the crews moved in, and the government did the thing that still stops my breath when I say it plainly. They hollowed out the White House like a pumpkin, with the walls left standing, and they kept the cameras running the whole time. And that is where I come in, because somebody had to develop the film. The Renovation had an official photographer, a quiet, limping, endlessly patient man from the Park Service, whose name is in the history books, and whose name I am deliberately not going to say tonight. Out of a respect you will understand by the end. He worked a big speed graphic, and he worked it like a surveyor, methodically, week over week, room by dying room. And his negatives went into fixed bureau numbering, and his prints went into the permanent record, and they are there today, in the Presidential Library and the archives, thousands of them, free for any citizen to look at. What the record needed was hands, and in 1950, the hands in the dark room at night were mine. 19 years old, hired off a vocational certificate to develop, print, number, and log the most important construction photographs in the country. I touched nearly every frame of that renovation while it was still wet. That is my qualification for telling you this story. And it is the only qualification on earth that would let a man see what I saw. Because what I saw does not show itself to people looking at pictures. It shows itself to people looking at hundreds of pictures in order, week after week, alone, at night. Let me walk you through what the cameras recorded, because the frames themselves are the spine of this whole account, and they need no help from me. There is a photograph from the 19th of January, 1950, of the East Room, the gold and white ballroom where 7 presidents lay in state, and in the photograph, the East Room is a wooden skeleton, the great ceiling propped on raw timber shores, the parquet gone, the walls stripped to brick. There is a photograph from the 9th of February of the second-floor corridor, the private hallway of presidents, reduced to a plank catwalk over open joists. There is one from the 10th of February of men dismantling a bathtub, hauling the president's own tub out through a window on a chain. From the 23rd of February, the Red Room wall cut open to the flue, a century of soot and mouse nests and newspaper wadding spilling out of the wound. From the 25th of January, and this one I printed twice because the Bureau wanted a copy for the engineers, the split beam above the lobby ceiling, a main timber of the 1817 rebuilding, cracked through like a bone. And you can see, if you look, the char on it, because that beam had survived the British burning the house in 1814 and had been holding up presidents, scorched, for 130 years. And then the demolition went past rooms and past floors and became something else, something the photographs record better than any words I own. By the spring of 1950, there is a frame, taken on the 17th of May, that they still publish in books, and every time I see it, I am 20 years old again with cold hands. It is the whole White House, from inside. And there is no inside. One vast gray shell, 165 feet long, the stone walls standing empty against the sky, with their windows like sockets. And the floor of it is raw, excavated earth, 40 feet down, and out of that earth stand a few naked steel columns and a ramp of dirt. And on the ramp of dirt, if you look, there is a bulldozer. A bulldozer. Inside the White House, they drove earth movers in through the doorways and dug the cellars of the new building out from under the old one, while the old one stood over the machines like a lampshade over a lit bulb. The photographs of it look wrong in a way that has nothing to do with ghosts. They look wrong the way a face with no eyes looks wrong. And I developed those frames one after another that spring. The shell from the north, the shell from the east corner, the concrete mixing plant they built inside the east wing, the temporary trestles running through the state floor windows, and I will tell you the truth of what the dark room was like in those months. It was church. Nobody talked. You lifted the most famous house on earth out of the tray, hollow, and you hung it up to dry with clothespins, and you went home at dawn on the streetcar, with your hands smelling of fixer, feeling like a man who had been allowed to see something the country was not supposed to see, which, in every way that matters, I was. I have brought you here, to the spring of 1950, to the empty shell and the machines in the pit, for a reason. Because it was in the last week of May, with the house at its emptiest, with every floor gone, and every wall gone, and nothing left. Inside that stone rectangle, but dirt and steel, and 11 decades of dust hanging in the work lights, that the photographer's negatives began to come into my darkroom, with one extra workman in them. Always in the background, always at the middle distance, always standing still, while every other man in the frame was bent to a task or blurred with motion. And on the night I finally understood what I was looking at, the night of the corridor print I began this account with, I did what any 19-year-old would do. I took the wet print and the negative and the shift log down the hall to the photographer's office, and I laid them on his desk under the lamp, and I said, "Sir, there is a man in this picture, and there was no man in the building, and there is no floor where he is standing." And the old man looked at the print for a long, long time, and he did not say, "There is nothing there," and he did not say, "You are tired, son." He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a folder, a thick one, and set it beside my print, and said, in that soft, flat voice of his, "I know. Sit down. I have been photographing him since February." The folder held 26 prints, and the photographer let me go through them one at a time, while he sat with his bad leg up on the desk drawer and said nothing, which was his way. And I want to take you through what was in that folder, the way it came to me, print by print, because I have spent 75 years deciding whether that half hour was the most frightening of my life or the most important, and I have settled on both. The earliest frame was from the 9th of February, 1950. I knew the negative number before I read the slip, because I had developed it myself. It was the second floor corridor series, the catwalk over the open joists, the series I told you about. In the frame, the photographer had marked, far down the corridor, past the last work lamp, where the hallway goes to shadow, there is a man. You would never see him unless someone tapped the spot with a pencil, which is what the old man did. Reached over without a word and tapped, and once you see him, you cannot unsee him, and you cannot make him make sense. The workmen that winter wore coveralls and caps, and they moved, and the camera's long exposures smeared them into gray streaks. There are famous frames where a laborer passing through is nothing but a ghost of motion. This man is sharp, perfectly sharp, in a 2-second exposure, which means that for 2 full seconds, in a condemned hallway after the shift bell, he did not move at all. Not a hand, not the head. He stands a little too narrow and a little too tall, the proportions of a man seen through old window glass, and he faces the camera. In every single one of the 26 prints, February into May, demolition floor by floor, he faces the camera. I said the obvious things, and the photographer let me say them, because he had said them all himself, months earlier, to his own darkroom ceiling at 2 in the morning. A worker who wandered in. The old man slid the shift logs across the desk. He had already pulled them, every date, and I checked them again that night and a third time that week. The building was sealed those nights, Army engineers on the doors, a sign-in book with a guard sergeant whose whole career was that book. And on 11 of the 26 dates, the interior was logged empty at the time, stamped on the negative sleeve. A double exposure, I said. A plate used twice. But the Bureau's film stock was sheet film in numbered holders, loaded and logged. And some of those frames were from holders I had loaded with my own hands, fresh from the box. A prank, I said. Somebody's idea of a joke on the government. And the photographer took his leg down off the drawer and leaned forward and said the first of the 3 things he said that night that I have carried ever since. "Son," he said, "I have been photographing this house since before you could read. A joke stands where a man can stand. Look where he is standing. And I looked. And that was the night the folder stopped being a curiosity. Because print by print, the old man had done what a surveyor does. In the February frames, the figure stands in doorways, on stair landings, in the corridor, ordinary places, places with floors. In the March frames, the demolition eating downward all the time, he stands on the joists after the flooring was stripped, out in the middle of the open framing, where the men themselves only went on planks, and there are no planks in the frames. And in the April frames, with the joists gone too, with whole rooms opened into 100-foot wells of scaffolding and dropped light, he stands where the rooms used to be, level with vanished floors, half in the line of a wall that was hauled out in dump trucks the week before. In one print, and this is the one I still see, when I close my eyes in the afternoon. God help me. Not the night, the afternoon. There is a frame of the gutted east room, shot from a scaffold, and he is standing 11 feet above the stripped subfloor, in empty air, at exactly the height where the parquet of the east room, the floor that 7 coffins had rested on, used to lie. The house was being taken apart around him, and wherever he stood, the house as it used to be was still holding him up. I asked the photographer what he was. The second of the 3 things. He worked his thumb along the edge of the desk a while, an old man's gesture, buying a moment. And then he said, "I do not know what he is, and I have given up deciding, because deciding is not my job. My job is the record. The government of the United States is tearing the inside out of this house down to the dirt it stands on, and my orders are to photograph everything that is removed." He looked at the folder a long time. "Well," he said, "he is being removed." We tried the enlarger that same night, and here, I have to slow down and speak as a darkroom man, because what happened under that enlarger is the entire hinge of this account, and it is a thing only film people will fully believe, and every film person will believe it instantly. A photograph is made of grain, little clumps of silver, and when you enlarge a face, it does not just get bigger, it dissolves, gracefully, lawfully, the face becoming clouds of gray at a rate your eye learns to expect. 20 years in that trade, and your hands know how much detail lives in a negative before you ever make the print. We put the sharpest of the 26 frames under the enlarger, and I cropped to the figure and took it up in steps, 5 by 7, 8 by 10, 11 by 14, and the figure would not spend its detail. The coveralls resolved, a seam on the shoulder resolved, and the face did not dissolve into grain the way a face must. The grain in the oval, where his face should be, stayed exactly as coarse as the grain around it. No finer, no worse. But it arranged itself, and I am choosing that verb after 75 years of looking for a better one. It arranged itself the way iron filings arrange, into something that reads as a face at every size and resolves at none. At 8 inches, it is a tired workman. At 14, it is a smudge shaped like patience. At 20 inches, and we only went to 20 once, the old man reached past me and shut the enlarger lamp off with 2 fingers, gently, the way you close a book that a child should not be reading. And that was the 3rd thing he said that night, and the last. That is enough of looking at him, son. It is his being looked at that I have started to worry about. From here on, we log him like weather. We measure, we number, we file, and we do not enlarge him anymore. So that is what we became. That spring, the old man and I, while the crews below us dug the cellars deeper, and the trucks hauled the last of the old house away down Pennsylvania Avenue. two government photography men, keeping a private ledger inside the official one. He shot the renovation the way he always had, methodical, week over week. And I developed and printed and numbered, and when the figure was in a frame, and by June he was in 1 frame and 9, I logged the negative number in a gray pocket notebook the bureau never knew existed. With 3 columns the photographer ruled out for me himself: date, location of camera, and the 3rd column, the one that would break the whole case open by autumn, the column he made me measure with the focus scale and the plate geometry, and mark to the 10th of a foot. And I did not understand yet why he cared, and he did not tell me. Distance of subject from lens. Through that summer of 1950, the renovation ground on, and I want to keep showing you the real record as we go, because the record is the country's, not mine, and because you need to feel how public all of this was, how many eyes were on that site, while our gray notebook filled up in the dark. The photographs from those months exist, and you have seen some of them tonight. The empty stone shell with the sky in its windows. The bulldozer working down in the pit where the state floors had been. Photographed on the 17th of May from inside the shell. A machine idling where the map of the country's history used to have a floor. In the autumn, they photographed the northeast corner, the 6th of November. The new steel rising inside the old stone like bones growing inside a glove. And through the state windows they ran conveyor trestles. And inside the east wing, they poured out of a concrete plant built into the house itself. And if you have never seen these frames, they are one search away, and they are the strangest true photographs this country ever took of itself. 150 men worked that site by day. Tourists pressed the fence. The president walked the rim of the pit with the commissioners. And at night, after the sign-out book closed, the photographer worked his long exposures in the empty shell for the engineering record, and the figure stood in 1 frame and 9, and faced the lens, and was logged, like weather. By September, the gray notebook held 61 entries, and the 3rd column had begun to speak. And I am going to let it speak to you the way it spoke to me, because I was the one holding the pencil, and I promise you, the arithmetic is simple enough for a tired man at 2 in the morning, which is what I was when it finally said its piece. Date by date, the camera moved all over that site. Basement level, scaffold tops, the shell floor, the rim of the pit, inside the new steel, the far lawn. The figure appeared in doorways, on vanished floors, against the old stone, down the dead corridors. Every place in that building, at one time or another, held him. And the 3rd column, the distance of subject from lens, measured off the plate geometry frame after frame after frame, to the 10th of a foot, read like a broken record. 41 feet, 41 feet, 40 and 9/10, 41, 41 and 1/10. 61 entries from a camera that never stood in the same place twice, and the spread across all of them was inside one long stride. And the night I finally saw it whole, I did the thing you do. I checked it backward. I took the site plans and I plotted where he would have had to be standing, physically, in the building, to be 41 feet from each camera position. And the plot made no pattern at all. It was scatter. It was noise. He had stood in 61 different places that made no sense together. The only thing in the world his positions organized around was us. He was never 41 feet from anything in that house. He was 41 feet from the camera. Every time. He was not haunting the building. He was attending the photography. I did not sleep after that shift. I rode the streetcar to the end of the line and back, twice in the September dawn. And I will tell you, the thought I could not put down, because it is the thought that separates this account from every ghost story you have ever been told at a campfire. A ghost belongs to a place. Everyone knows that. It is the one rule of the dead we all agree on. The house is haunted. The stairwell is haunted. You can leave. What our notebook said was different. Whatever stood in those frames had noticed the one activity on that site. That was not demolition. Amid 150 men tearing the house down, it had found the two men recording that the house had existed, and it had taken up a fixed station relative to the instrument of the recording, the way a man stands a fixed distance from a fire. And the distance was close enough to be in the frame, and far enough, I came to believe. And God knows I have had the decades to refine this belief, far enough not to alarm the fire into going out. If you are the kind of listener who is still here, 61 entries deep into an old technician's notebook, then you are the kind this channel was built for, and I will ask you plainly while the streetcar turns around. Subscribe so that the rest of the record can find you, and when you are done tonight, leave a light on somewhere in the house, and if you keep photographs of your family on the walls, walk past them like they are only paper, because they are. They are only paper. That is what I told myself on the streetcar too. And it held. That comfort. It held for exactly 11 days. Because on the 29th of September, 1950, the photographer shot the engineering series of the new sub-basement, the deepest concrete in the new house, the level that had never existed in the old one. And I developed the sheets that night in the usual silence, and frame 7 came up in the tray, and I called the old man at his home telephone, which I had never once done, and all I said was, "You need to come in." Frame 7 was a long exposure down the new sub-basement corridor, raw concrete, string lights, standing water in the low spots. The figure was in it, dead center, down the corridor, facing the lens. In the new construction, in the part of the building that had no past, no burned timbers, no dead presidents, concrete 11 days old out of a plant in the East Wing, and he stood in it, as easily as he had stood in the oldest doorway of the old house. And when I put the scale on the plate, my hands already knew, and the third column got its 62nd entry, 40 feet, 3/10, not 41. The old man stood beside me, in the safe light looking at the wet print for the better part of 10 minutes, and I watched 70 years of method fight it out with what was in the tray, and method won, the way it always won with him. He took out his own notebook and made his own entry, and said quietly, "Well, son, he has followed the record into the new house, and he has taken a step." Through the winter of 1950 into 51, the new house grew inside the old walls, steel and concrete, floor by floor, and the figure kept his appointments, and the third column kept its books, and the books ran one direction, 40 feet, 3/10 in September, 39.5 by Thanksgiving, 38, 2/10 in January, in a frame of the new grand staircase going in, 37 even in March, and I remember March, because that was the month the old man changed the rule about enlargements, the rule he himself had made. We put the March frame under the enlarger, one time, only to the first stop, and the reason was simple and terrible. At 37 feet, detail was arriving. The coveralls had buttons now. The hands, which in the February folder a year earlier had been gray mitts of shadow, had fingers, and the fingers were wrong in a way I am not going to describe to you, because the old man shut the lamp off with his 2 fingers the way he always did, and this time he did not say anything at all, and we never enlarged him again. A step a month, more or less. That was his pace. That whole second year, whatever he was crossing the distance between himself and the camera, the way winter crosses a country. Without hurry, without doubt, on a schedule you could rule into a notebook. And there were 37 feet left, and the renovation had about a year to run. Now I have to tell you about the Bureau, because in the spring of '51, the official record itself began to twitch. And this is the part of the account I can least prove. And so, I will tell it most carefully. Our negatives went up the chain. Always. That was the whole point of the operation. Prints to the commission, prints to the engineers, negatives into federal numbering. In April, a man came down from somewhere above the Park Service, a civilian, gray suit, polite as a tax auditor, and spent 2 days with the negative files and the logbooks. And when he left, the logbooks were intact and initialed, and 11 negatives were gone. Signed out, in a hand nobody knew, against a regulation nobody could find, and never signed back in. And every one of the 11. I checked against the gray notebook the night he left. Every one of the 11 was a frame with the figure at middle distance. The clearest ones, the ones a stranger flipping the files might stop at. They left us the far ones, the faint ones, the deniable ones. And they never said one word to the photographer, or to me. No warning, no question, no order. And that silence taught me more about the government I worked for than the war had taught my brothers. Somebody upstairs had seen him too. Somebody upstairs had decided the record was better thinned than explained. And somebody upstairs was wrong about which of us was keeping the real record, because the gray notebook never left the old man's coat. And the working duplicates, the ones a careful darkroom man strikes for safety against exactly this day, were not in the federal files. And I will leave that sentence where it lies. The president came through the site that spring, more than once. That is history. You can find the frames, the flat Missouri hat brim, among the engineers on the rim of the pit, the famous walking stick, and I printed those too. And they are good photographs of a brave and worried man inspecting the inside of a national symbol he had ordered, scooped out like a melon. And I will tell you what is in none of those frames. Him. Not once. In 2 years of negatives, the figure never once appeared in a frame with the president, or the first lady, or a senator, or a commissioner, or any of the brass at all. And the old man noticed it long before I did, and made the driest remark I ever heard from him. He is not interested in the leaseholders, he said. He is interested in the surveyors. He knows who is making the deed. I want to give you the last 3 entries of the gray notebook plainly, without music, because they do not need any. February of 1952. The interior's nearly finished. The paneling going up over the new steel. A frame of the state dining room, and the figure between the drop cloths, and the column says 22 feet. The 10th of March, 1952. A frame of the East Room, the new East Room. Chandeliers crated on the fresh parquet, and the column says 16 feet, and at 16 feet on contact. With no enlargement at all, you could see that the face was turned up into the light, and that the arms were no longer at his sides. And the 20th of March, 1952. The photographer worked alone that night. The engineering completion series. The last long exposures of the empty finished rooms before the furniture came home. And I developed the sheets at 4 the next afternoon. Daylight, I had stopped developing his night work. At night by then. And he had never once asked me why. And sheet after sheet came up clean. Room after new room. Bright and empty and done. And then the corridor frame. The second floor corridor. The same corridor as the first print in the folder. The same camera position the old man had used in February of 1950. He had gone back to close the circle, methodical to the end, and the exposure was flawless. And the corridor was finished and papered and lit, and the figure stood in it 9 feet from the lens. 9 feet. Inside 9 feet, a 2-second exposure resolves everything, every thread, every pore. And I stood in my own darkroom, in the government of the United States, with my back against the sink, holding the last photograph of the sequence. And I am not going to describe the face. I am not. Not because I cannot remember it. Because I cannot forget it. And there is no reason on this earth for 2 of us to carry it. I will tell you only the one detail that matters to the record, the one I wrote in the gray notebook, with a hand I did not recognize as mine, in the 3rd column, where a number should go. He was not standing still anymore. The exposure was 2 seconds, and the figure was sharp, and both feet were off the floor, mid-stride, frozen clean in the middle of a step, which means, and hear this the way a film man hears it, that for those 2 seconds he was not moving, and walking was simply the shape he had chosen to be photographed in. The step was aimed at the lens, and the print, which I fixed, and washed, and dried, with the hands of a 19-year-old who had become an old man in one afternoon. That print I did not number, and did not log, and did not show to anyone alive, including, God forgive me, the photographer. The Trumans moved back into the White House on the 27th of March, 1952, 7 days after the corridor frame. That is history, and the pictures of it are sunny. The moving vans, the hat, the handshake at the door, and the house they moved into was, in the plainest engineering terms, a brand new building wearing the old one's skin, a steel skeleton set in fresh concrete, standing inside the original stone shell, the way a hand stands inside a glove. The newspapers called it a renovation. The old man, boxing his equipment that spring, called it something else. One evening, not really to me. They think they restored a house, he said. They built it a reliquary. And I have thought about that word for 70 years, because a reliquary is not a home. A reliquary is a container you build when the thing inside can no longer be allowed to touch the world. The photographic mandate ended with the construction. The last engineering series was filed in April. The bureau numbers closed out. The commission dissolved itself with a dinner. And the record, the great record, thousands of negatives, the most documented demolition in American history, was complete. And it went where records go, into the archives and the presidential library, where it sits today, public, free, open to any citizen with an afternoon. And the figure was gone. I want to say that as flatly as it happened. The old man shot the finished house through that spring for the file. Official rooms, state floors, the new corridor. 63 frames. I developed every one. Empty. He shot the shell of the seasons after that. Ceremonies, arrivals, the ordinary duties of his post. And I logged and printed for him. Another 2 years before my own posting changed. And in all those hundreds of frames, nothing ever stood at 41 feet again, or at 16, or at 9. Whatever had attended the making of that record, its attendance ended when the record ended. It did not haunt the house, I told you that early, and I no longer believe it haunted the demolition either. I believe, and this is an old technician's belief, bought with his whole life, that it came for the survey. For 2 years, the government of the United States pointed a lens at a dying house, and formally, frame by numbered frame, witnessed it out of existence, and something stood at a mourner's distance, and witnessed the witnessing, and moved 1 step closer each month, the way a man moves up a receiving line, patiently, toward the book everyone is signing. It was never walking toward us. I misread that for years, and it cost me my sleep. It was walking toward the file. Let me close the accounts, all of them, and then I will tell you the part I have never told. The 11 negatives that went upstairs with the gray auditor in 1951 never came back. In the 1990s, an old man with time on his hands, I paid for copies of the Federal Registers, and those 11 numbers are carried, all 11, as voided, water damage, which you may believe if you like, and which tells me the government of that era filed him precisely the way it filed everything else. It could not explain, quietly and in the passive voice. The guard sergeant, with the sign-in book, died certain his book had never been wrong, and his book never was wrong, and that is exactly the horror of it. And the photographer. The old man worked his post another decade and a half, limping up his ladders, shooting his careful frames of history, and he never spoke of the figure to me again, not once, and I honored his silence because it was his, and he retired, full of quiet honors, and died in the 1960s, and his renovation photographs are studied to this day, and they should be. They are magnificent, and his name, which I have kept out of this account, the way you keep a friend's name out of a fight, belongs to that magnificence and not to my midnight story. And that is my gift to him, made tonight in front of all of you, 70 years late. But he knew I would talk one day. I know he knew, because of the package. It reached me the month after his death. No letter, no return address, brown paper, and string tied by hands I would have known anywhere. His notebook, the twin of mine, the same 3 columns in that small surveyor's hand, beginning in February of 1950, ending on the 20th of March, 52, one line below the last entry, below the number 9, written larger than the rest, the only sentence in either notebook that is not a measurement. He was never in the house, son. He was in the record. Mind what you keep. Mind what you keep. So now, the part I have never told, and then the rule, and then us will let you go to bed. You remember the last print, the corridor, the 9 feet, the mid-stride, the face I will not give you. I told you I never numbered it, never logged it, never showed it to a living soul, and every word of that is true. And here is the rest. I never destroyed it either. I could not. I am a record man. It is the one shape my whole life has. The old man built it into me, across those 2 years of red light and silence. A record is a promise that a thing was real, and I stood at my own sink 100 times, across the decades, with that print in my hands and the stove lit in the next room, and I could not make myself break the promise. It is in a gray envelope, in a place I will not name, and it is the only photograph from the entire renovation of the White House of the United States that exists in one single copy, unnumbered, unfiled, unlooked at, and I have come to believe, late, too late, to be any use to me, that this is the exact reason I have been left alone all these years to grow old and tell you this, because the step was aimed at the file, and I never let him finish it. There is one frame of that great record that was never entered into the record, and he is standing in it, mid-stride, waiting, the way only that thing can wait to be kept. My instructions are written and witnessed and sealed with the envelope. When I die, it is to be burned, unopened, by someone who does not know what it is, and the ashes are not to be kept. And if you think that is a cruel trick to play on a patient thing, you are right. And I am 89 years old, and I have decided to be cruel. because the alternative is to be the door. And here is the rule, the only one this whole gray notebook of a life adds up to. And for once it is a rule about a thing every soul listening to me owns. Your photographs, the ones in your boxes, your albums, your telephones, the thousands of frames your family has made of itself across the years. The backgrounds of those pictures are the least looked at places human beings have ever made, and things that do not care to be seen know where we do not look. So some quiet afternoon, daylight, mind you, do it in daylight. Go through the old pictures, the reunions, the birthdays, the porches, and look past your people, into the depth of the frame, at the strangers. You will find the same strangers twice, sometimes, in pictures taken years apart, and almost always, that is a neighbor, a cousin's friend, the ordinary weave of a life. And you will laugh, and God willing, that is all you will ever find. But if you should find, across many years and many places, the same figure, at what your eye slowly admits, is the same distance, in frame after frame, sharp when it should be blurred, facing the lens when everyone else is living their day, then close the album gently, in the middle of the afternoon, and do not go looking for the other frames. And above all, and I mean this, the way the old man meant his last line to me, do not enlarge him. He knows the difference between being in a picture and being looked at. Everything in this account happened because two careful men crossed that line with a government enlarger, and one of us is dead, and the other one is talking to you at 2 a.m, with every light in the apartment burning. That is the whole of it. The most photographed demolition in American history, the 11 voided negatives, the notebook with 3 columns, and the one print that will owe him nothing because it will die unread. Before you go, put one thing in the comments for me, and look before you answer, but look in daylight. Have you ever found a stranger in the background of your own family's photographs more than once? I read every answer in the morning, with coffee, with the curtains open, and nearly all of them will be cousins and neighbors, and the sweet, crowded ordinariness of being alive, and I will be glad of every single one. And to the few of you who go quiet while you count the frames and feel the room get 1 degree colder, I will say only what the old man said to me the first night with the folder open between us. I know. Sit down. You are not crazy, and you are not alone. And whatever you do next, son, do it with the lamp on. Good night.